range of motion limitations and weakness. As you can see from the presentation, baseball, swimmers, almost every overhead athlete work really hard in this plane for that range of motion. So as you gain motion in this plane, you're going to lose it in this plane, which is external rotation and internal rotation. So most swimmers and most baseball players tend to lose this range of motion, which can cause this impingement and range of motion limitations. You're up.
Okay, so the treatment for swimmer shoulder, it kind of really depends on how painful they are, on which phase we would start them in. So the main thing is rest. The biggest thing that current research is showing, though, is that don't ever tell an athlete just to stop. Let them do something at practice that may not involve their shoulder, whether that's kicking drills, making sure that they're not holding that arm overhead on the kickboard, like underneath, or fin work. Anything to take pressure off the shoulder would be really good. This is important to maintain the strength and endurance of all the other musculature in the body, but as well as their mental health. Ice, NSAIDs, and then the physical therapy would consist of correcting the muscular imbalances, the range of motion, and progressive strengthening.
So this is basically where we begin. We're just going to pretend like you're coming into the physical therapy clinic first, or you're seeing an athletic trainer. And actually, Abby, I think, accidentally hit the nail right on the head when she said, you know, this is if you've taken 3 months off and you get right back in the pool, that's kind of how injuries can happen without maintaining your strengthening. It's almost always overuse. Almost always. The human body is really adaptable, and it will adapt to whatever we do. But if you're doing it overloading and not giving your body time to adapt, that's where a lot of problems come in. So say you go see a PT or you see an athletic trainer or orthopedic, we're going to do basically an exam. We're going to check your labrum, check your range of motion, check your strength, check your rotator cuff, and basically see where the problem's coming from. And with swimmer shoulder, it's usually rotator cuff tendonitis or impingement. Very similar things, so we're just going to consider them the same thing. So in phase one, say you're really irritable, your shoulder, not your brain, and you're probably upset too because you can't swim. But say your shoulder's really irritable, you know, within the first couple of times, first couple of laps, you start hurting. We would basically start with waist level exercises. It just puts the shoulder in an advantageous position. You don't want to start with the overhead repetitive motions that are painful without finding out what's going on, basically. So we would basically start with waist level strengthening exercises, rows, extensions, lat pull downs. Abby actually has some examples of these that we're going to show later. And that's where we would begin. Our PowerPoint leave?
Yep.
It's back.
Sorry about that.
So,
yeah, I
didn't hear. So depending on how irritable the shoulder is, like I said, we would start at phase one, which is where we start with all the waist level activities for rotator cuff strengthening and take you out of that painful position. Impingement basically happens at full range flexion and internal rotation. So when you're reaching full, when you dive in like this, or as a baseball player throws, we're taking you out of that position and strengthening your rotator cuff to improve your tolerance to that position. Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So phase two, and like I said before, we may start a swimmer at this phase. It really just depends on the irritability of the injury. So we'll do some more overhead stabilization activities, some more like 90-90, some inverted rows where you're really having to use your body weight, PNF patterns, concentric and eccentric pull-throughs. It's something kind of Greg and I came up with on the crossover. And then we would progress your stretches to where you're doing a standing sleeper stretch against the wall. It's just a little bit harder than laying down. And then we would just move those arms up to 90-90 in the doorway to really get that pec stretch.
So Abby asked us for like rehab stuff and basically a maintenance program too. And honestly, the maintenance is very similar to your rehab, just the progression is different. Rehab is, I don't want to say it's easy, but basically you teach your body to tolerate load. So you start the load at the very bottom to where it's not hurting, strengthen your rotator cuff, strengthen the core, things like that, and just kind of work your way up to higher level activities. And maintenance is just continuing to do the things you need to do to keep your body strong. So while you may not have to progress every exercise with weight or with bands, etc., it's basically just doing your in-range rehab for a prolonged period of time. Just with, you know, instead of doing it 3 to 4 days a week, maybe you're strengthening once to twice a week and swimming once to twice a week. But the maintenance program is going to be very similar to the progression of the strengthening program.
And this is also a good time to do the whole crossover program that is given to you when you order the crossover symmetry. We use this a lot with our patients, and it's really overall a really good activity to do. So now we're going to start switching back and forth with Abby showing us some of the exercises that we suggested. Okay, so the first one is just a general row. Okay. And this one, what's important is to keep your elbows down by your side, just takes less pressure off the shoulder joint. There you go. So what's really important with rows that's commonly done wrong is you want to keep your shoulders out of your ears. Is like we say, we don't want this when you row. We want you to keep your shoulders down and back. Tuck your shoulder blades into your back pockets, as we say. When you go to pull back, you're initially starting to squeeze those shoulder blades together. The last thing you want is your elbows to go that far behind your body. So. Okay.
Oh, we missed the first 2 slides.
Okay. Okay. So then the second one would be shoulder extension. So this one, you keep your elbows nice and straight. Same thing, you want to keep your shoulders out of your ears. Keep those shoulder blades down and tight. Pinch your shoulder blades as you're pulling back, and you want to start right or stop right as you meet your body by your hips.
And both of these exercises are included in the crossover symmetry program. They may call them something a little different. I think the shoulder extensions are called crossover pull downs, but they basically give you a guide on how many to do. They give you a high and low level weight, and I think you have 3 different options of 2 different choices for each one. There's 6 bands with the ones that came with us, so that way you can basically kind of choose your own program and choose the resistance that's appropriate for you at the time.
Can everyone hear us? Okay, awesome. Okay, so we will switch to the next one. Okay, so with reverse flies, the most important thing about this one is, yeah, you want to make sure that your arms are at, the only best way to describe it is that like nipple level. You don't want them going too high. You don't want it way up here. Always keep a slight bend in your elbows too. And they're just nice and slow that way. Yep. And again, this one, you're really working on pinching those shoulder blades together, getting your shoulder retractors to activate. Yep. Perfect. Okay. So then the next one is lat pull downs. This one you would have the crossover on the top, and you just put your knees on the ground and you would kind of lean forward a little bit and activate your core, and you just pull straight down.
So very similar to the pull downs or shoulder extensions. It's just putting a slightly different angle. So it's helping you as you enter the water. Your initial pull is at a different angle than the rows. So this is kind of getting you a more powerful pull through, basically.
Okay. Oops. So this next one, the way I did it yesterday was just taking one of the crossover bands off and having it in your hands. Yep. So hold with your palms up. And I usually that's about right. And you want to keep your elbows nice and close into your sides like this. And then you'll pull apart while pinching those shoulder blades together. Perfect. This is called bilateral external rotation. This is a really good one. We also call them no monies. But this is just a good one to strengthen some muscles of the rotator cuff.
Yeah, can't overemphasize the rotator cuff enough with overhead athletes. If you've ever had back pain and gone to therapy or gone to a doctor, you hear, oh, you got to strengthen your core, it stabilizes your spine, etc. Your rotator cuff's the core of your shoulder. It's a very unstable joint. That's why it's so mobile. So keeping your rotator cuff strong and stable is the best thing for 1, injury prevention, and 2, performance.
Okay. So, wait. Okay. So then the next one is just a sleeper stretch. This one you can lay down onto the floor The key to a sleeper stretch is really being up on to your shoulder, which can be painful when you're in pain. And then you never want to push down at the hand. You want to push down below the wrist. So so let your hand go limp. There you go. You're going to feel a stretch in the posterior aspect of the shoulder. This one will help you gain that internal rotation. This is what swimmers lack, so it's important to get. Whereas we are, hold on, let me show you. You can really see it with my right. I'm excessively externally rotated, but I'm extremely limited internal. So this should be further down here, but I'm having to move my shoulder forward to get that. So this one is important for just general range of motion to help prevent shoulder injuries. Okay, so then the next one is just your doorway stretch. This one's stretching your pec muscles. A lot of swimmers are rounded forward shoulder because everything we do is here. Yep. And so if it's painful to bring your arms up to 90, we just have patients bring it down to like a 45-degree angle on the door frame and then just step through and you'll feel a stretch across your pec muscles. Yep. Perfect. Okay. So now we will move into phase 2. So these inverted rows are probably this guy's favorite exercise to do. This one, you can just take something that's pretty strong. I mean, here we use a 45-pound bar, but anything's really good, and all you do is just lay on the ground with your feet propped up on a chair and then pull up. So it's just an inverted row, really good to work those big back extensors. Okay, and the next one, you want to do 90-90?
Yeah, we can do 90-90. So the inverted, she's right, I do love inverted rows. But if you think about it, most of our jobs are pushing things forward. We're rounded shoulders here, so everybody wants to work out the chest, you want to work out your arms, right? Everybody's like the show me muscles. So, but no one ever actually pulls their body weight up. So if you're ever on a bench or something, basically it's just you bench, you set it down, and then you're pulling your body weight up. And if you're not symmetrical, then you'll find that one's a lot harder.
Yes.
So the 90-90 rotation is the rotator cuff works to stabilize the shoulder. That's its main job. Seat the head of the humerus into the glenoid, basically. But it also does rotational movements. So strengthening rotator cuff at waist level is great, but you also have to strengthen it up here where it's unstable. So you're relying on your cuff, your labrum, all this other stuff. So the 90-90 externals, you're going to be here and rotating back. And you're really strengthening the posterior cuff muscles, which are the most important stabilizers of the cuff, just like that.
Perfect.
And purple's actually pretty tough for that, so Abby's super strong. Good job. And I guarantee you if she did that for 10 to 15 reps, even though she's strong, she would start to feel a burn in the shoulders. It's just tough. So that's, as you start to get stronger, you basically move the range of motion to where it's more unstable to have your cuff work stronger.
Yep. Okay. So then the next one is just a PNF pattern. Let's see, it is called proprioception neuromuscular facilitation. So it's a very big word. And so we're doing the diagonal 2 pattern. We like to call this sword pull, and it's a good way to remember how to do this properly. So you would, so you would actually turn and face to your right, Abby. There you go. And so you'll start with your arm down like a sword is in a sheath, and then you're going to pull it straight out. Yep. So this is a really good one because everything swimmers do is moving into that overhead activity. So we like to do this one a lot with really any shoulder injury because it's really important.
And it was a small correction Lori made on Abby when she was pulling off, but having that rotation, starting with the sword in and rotating on the way out, yep, like that, as she rotates up, yep. So just that little bitty rotation helps strengthen the external rotators. So like I said, small change, but huge impact on basically the quality of the exercise. That's the word I was trying to say.
So I see that Joey is asking a question. Do you want to do it until it burns or just a few reps for the rotation? Me and Greg like to do to fatigue. So that would probably be what we would say if you're in our clinic, is do it to fatigue, and then sometimes we have people drop to the next one down and do that one until fatigue as well. So we like fatigue.
Yeah, injury. The reason I like fatigue is injuries happen when you get tired, typically at the end of half, into fourth quarter if you're a football fan, later innings if you're a baseball fan. I would assume swimming would be the same way. It's the last swim of the day is when it gets you. So working to fatigue rather than just when you feel a burn. However, if you're injured, we may stop at the first sign of a burn and then gradually increase over time.
Oh. Okay, so the concentric pull through. So this is the one facing, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're trying to mimic like a freestyle pull through. So first we'd have to describe what concentric and eccentric is. The most basic way is concentric is when you're lengthening a muscle. Shortening a muscle, and eccentric is when you're lengthening a muscle. Sorry. So this one, it would be important to pull through and then come back. So you would face the door. And so you would just cross it. So hold it in your right hand, Abby. There you go. And then pull down like you would, and then let it come on up. Yep.
So it's basically giving you resistance throughout your swimming stroke. Like when you hit the water, that would be your resistance. So you're pulling through like you're pulling through the water. And then with baseball, most injuries happen after you release the pitch. So it's on your eccentric control. So that's when your muscles in the back, they want to do this, but to get there, they have to slow you down on the way through. So when pitchers hurt their arm via curveball, via overhead, sliders, everything where you're really whipping your arm through, those muscles back there are the most important ones. So these would be strengthening your pull through and making you control your follow through, basically, as far as baseball goes, or your reach, I guess you would say.
So then the eccentric one is just doing the same thing but facing away from the door or away from your anchor point. And so this one's really going to make you have to focus and not make the rubber band snap you. Yep. You feel how it wants to like snap, cross. You feel how it wants to snap you. So you want to prevent, don't let it do that. So that's when that eccentric control is coming in. You're slowing down the motion. So, and then scaption. I didn't have these on the PowerPoint, but this is really important for rotator cuff is the scaption movement. One, this is the plane that we do everything in your shoulder. Nobody reaches up like this to do stuff. Everyone reaches out at an angle. So scaption is really important to make sure that you are strong in that plane. So for this one, you would start with the lower bands and you would face away from the anchor. Okay. And then you start down at your arms, and then you come up at a 45-degree angle, and then back down. Perfect.
So one of the smaller muscles of your rotator cuff, but the most frequently torn, is the supraspinatus. Supraspinatus is most active from 0 to 45 degrees of scaption, so basically waist to about halfway up. So this exercise is fantastic for targeting that. It's working all the cuff. They're all having to stabilize, but this exercise right here is where the supraspinatus was measured via EMG to be the most active. So that's one of the most important things you can do to basically maintain that joint space and keep your rotator cuff muscles strong.
Tell them what an EMG is.
EMG is basically they put electrodes on the muscles and find out at which point they're the most active, basically. So electromyography, or basically measuring what muscles work the most at certain times.
Okay, and then the next one is Serratus Punches. So you would stand the same way that you do with the scaption, and you would have the bands here, and then you would punch out, and then back. So this one's all about control. So a lot of swimmers have a problem with their scapular winging. It's pretty common. Like mine wing a lot, especially on my right side.
Weak.
Yeah. So your serratus anterior sits underneath your shoulder blade, and so this one keeps it to the rib cage. This one's important to help strengthen those muscles to better maintain your scapula on the side that we can't see that often. Yep.
And another point of that, scapular winging is caused by weak serratus anterior. If you have that, it also changes your scapular mechanics. So as you lift your arm, your scapula rotates, and it has to have correct rotation to get full range of motion. If you don't have that scapula that rotates correctly, it causes impingement, which is a decreased joint space. And if you repetitively stay in, aka you swim, in shorter ranges of motion, you're basically just wearing out your supraspinatus, your rotator cuff, basically causing that impingement syndrome. So keeping your rotator cuff strong, good scapular mechanics, puts you in less pain when you're swimming.
Okay. And so then the next one is the standing sleeper stretch. So this one, it's a lot harder to do. Yep, just stand against, relax that hand, and then push down. Yep. And if you watch the Abby, yours is really tight. Oh, yeah. So, yeah,
but for comparison,
tight.
just for curiosity, can you turn the other way and show external rotation, what it looks like? Yeah. So that is professional swimmers, really good swimmers, professional baseball players. You have what they call degrees of freedom. And so if you gain motion in one way, you lose it in another. So me, like I was a right-handed pitcher, so my arm goes way back here. And it doesn't go as far down this way. But this is my left arm. It's normal. I don't know if you can see that, but I can reach way back here. So as you gain motion this way, which is good for swimming, you're going to lose it this way unless you stay on top of your mobility, which is very important.
So this one is, again, another really good one, but this can be painful for somebody if they're super inflamed. If you do watch the video on the PowerPoint, you will see me grimacing when I am stretching that on the wall because it did not feel very good for me either. Okay, so then the last one is that doorway 90-90. This is the one where you'll just have the arms straight up in the door frame and then step through. You'll feel the stretch across your chest.
Yep, and if you just have one wall, you can just do one at a time like that. Also effective.
Yeah, you can also do it in a corner. So if you can't get to a door frame or something, and then go into the corner. So that's another way of doing this one. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Justin's typing. Okay, so what we recommend our patients that come in here and they fall in love with the crossover symmetry is we recommend them buying the professional one just because it comes with majority of the bands. And you can get it, like Abby said, 3 different ways. You can do the door anchor like her, you can do the wall anchor, or the squat rack if you are one of the lucky few that have a squat rack in your basement. You can hook it up that way. But we recommend it all the time to our high level patients who really enjoy it when they're in here and they want to keep their shoulder strong. So
the professional one comes with 2 sets of bands, so one on each side basically. It's 3 pounds, 7 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, and 25 pounds, the whole set right there. They're all labeled and colored. So that, like I said before, they basically say you can't afford it and want to buy one set at a time. You can pick. It's like amateur, athlete, or high level, and they'll show you which 2 bands correlate with all the exercises on the program, so you can start there. But for the money, the professional one is just the easiest because I do this a couple times a week just because I like to lift heavy things, and sometimes I hurt my shoulder when I do that. So I'll run through the program twice a week, and I usually do it on the higher level. But sometimes if I'm sore, I'll just bump it down a level just to keep my mobility and strength. So,
is there any other questions? Stephanie.
yeah, if you're not injured, you can just skip to phase 2, which phase 2 is a lot like phase 1. It's just overhead, basically. But like I said, if you purchase the crossover or go to their website, they actually have 2 programs listed, and you can hang it up on your door, and they will run you through. They have a lot of videos that'll show you how to do it. You can contact Abby, you can contact Lori or myself with the exercises, but they'll have a picture, they'll have a rep scheme that you can follow and tell you to do it 2 to 3 times a week. And so even if you're new to working out or new to swimming or even new to prehab, really, it's a good starting point that will run you through.
Okay. So on the PowerPoint, there is our emails. You can email us at any time and ask us any questions you want. It doesn't even really have to be shoulder related. It can be anything. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. There you go. So our emails are on the screen. Feel free to email us. And if you have any other questions, think of something later. Like I said, just shoot us an email.
Cool. You guys go ahead and unmute and mute yourself for a second so we're not echoing. Sweet. All right, so yeah, if there's no other questions, guys, we're going to go ahead and close this out. Crossover symmetry is just what we've been using. It's what I have at my house, as you can see. Like Greg, Lori, and I are all big fans of their system. It's super easy setup. Like legitimately, these door frame is just essentially like a buckle. So you just wrap it around the door and you buckle it together, and then you can do these exercises from a door that obviously closes and locks itself shut. So they're super easy to use, and it comes with an array of different bands. You don't need the whole gamut of bands unless you're, it just depends on your goals for that scenario. Also within crossover symmetry too, if you have any knee issues like with breaststroke kickers and kind of having inflammation of the knees, they have like hip resistance bands too. So you can do glute bridges with a band, you can do squats with a band, you can do a lot of different exercises with that. But the cool part is they're basically trying to do as a company, crossover symmetry, like giving you guys a pretty good prehab and activation set of exercises. So if you don't know anything, or maybe you can't afford to go to a physical therapist, or you haven't been to the doctor and you don't have a diagnosis, you have a solid shoulder therapy program that you can do at home or at the pool or wherever you are. Lori has created this PowerPoint. I wanted to make sure that when we were going through the presentation, you guys physically saw what the exercises looked like. I will email out the slides though after we close this down so you guys can take a look at those exercises and or try them yourself. Lori, I'd say one thing that I have that I think would be a good question to answer is, what are the rep schemes looking like between phase 1 and phase 2? And is it like 12 sets? 3 sets of 12 or 4 sets of 12? Like, what would you say generally, like we would look for in rep schemes?
So this is where I'm a little different than a lot of physical therapists. Phase 1, early on, or when it's irritable, you're going to start at waist level, and you're going to start with the tried and true, like 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 8. Just whenever you feel a burn, basically, whenever we're mimicking that pain, we're letting your body adapt, we're getting stronger, then you go again. Once you get to phase 2, how many strokes do you do when you're swimming, right? It's kind of a lot. So this is where you'd really want to go to fatigue. You can really up your reps, 4 or 5 sets of 10. I've done 10 sets of 10 on thumb slings before. Don't recommend doing it on squats. That was a mistake on my part. But as you progress and get stronger, and with crossover, you can up your resistance and up your rep schemes to basically fatigue out the muscles, because like I said, that's when injuries happen, and you want to be a little more aggressive since you're doing such a repetitive motion. You don't want to just do 5 reps and say, okay, I got stronger. Well, yeah, you did, but your endurance is going to be terrible. So that's when you really need to work on, since swimming is an endurance sport. Unless, however, you're like a quick burst power swimmer, we kind of need to train per sport.
Yep. Does that answer the question, Abby?
Yeah. Well, cool. So if you guys don't have any more questions, we're going to go ahead and close that out. If you guys want to get a hold of me, my email is abby@swimlikeafish.org. But Greg and Lori are awesome resources for you all to have. So if you have any further questions on them, or maybe you more specifically have something going on with your shoulder and you want to get kind of a quick opinion on that, it's really nice of them to, during this time, be giving their knowledge out to people and just wanting to help everybody. Just having a passion from swimming from Lori, and then Greg having a passion for baseball. It sounds like between the 3 of us, we all have an array of shoulder issues. So we know what it's like to have a shoulder problem. We know how uncomfortable it can be. So yeah, we empathize with you guys, and we'd like to make your swimming careers as fruitful as possible. So you're very welcome, Stephanie. Thanks for joining in, Joey. Lori and Greg, thanks so much for doing this. Sorry, you guys, about all the kind of weird technical difficulties today. I'm not really sure what happened with all of that, but I'm glad that we made it work. So we will all talk to you guys soon.
Hold on, Abby. I got one more thing.
Cool.
So if you are in, can we do across state lines?
I think it's still just Georgia.
Okay, it's still just Georgia. But if you're in Georgia and say you just want to talk to me and Greg for a little bit, we can do telehealth. That way we can show you some stuff too. So just email me or Greg at the email addresses provided, and we can do a quick 15-minute, 30-minute screen. There we go. For you via telehealth.
And I do think we can screen across state lines, just if you wanted to get an actual treatment plan kind of going. That's when it's going to get a little more tricky, which is okay. We can hook you up with someone in your area or see if they have removed the state line rule. But just for a quick screen, like, hey, that looks like you need to get that checked out, or no, it's probably just a little inflammation. You've been doing this. This is a change. It's something we can help you do. And the screenings are free, 15-minute screenings. So just a way to hopefully help you guys through the quarantine.
There we go.
Well, that's awesome. I'll be sure to include that. So I do a follow-up email too. So I'll be sure to include that in the follow-up email as well, because there was a lot more people that registered for the presentation that were able to join live. So I'll make sure that people are aware of that. That's great, though. I appreciate you guys doing that. That's awesome. So with that, we'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Lori. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your lovely Fridays, everyone. And we will be back here soon. Bye.